What is alternative horsemanship? Where'd you come from? What's your background? And I think it's one of these things that people don't realize how many, I'm going to say decades I've been doing this. When I started out with horses, it was just supposed to be for fun. And I was able to kind of hang on and go, and we'll say survive the ride. And I was exposed to formal lessons. And really, the idea was, what would you do with a horse? Well, you would ride and compete. What else would you do with a horse? And I didn't particularly come from a family that was horsey or horse experienced. So a lot of this was really having to go out and learn actively. And as I became interested in different disciplines, 3-day eventing really caught my eye. The adrenaline, the cross country, the craziness at that time. It was a very different world than what it is right now. And then as I started to ride more and realized that I had an ability to ride horses that other people couldn't ride, or I could make things look good that other people couldn't, I realized I really needed to finesse what I was doing. And so I went, and at that time, again, there really wasn't like interdiscipline training at all. So even though we did 3-day eventing, everybody thought we were crazy because we just wanted to gallop cross country and could care less about dressage and prayed through show jumping and so on. So I wound up going and specifically working under dressage trainers and show jumping trainers, and wound up heading over to a racetrack, which really gave me an education. And really it was about as much horse handling as possible. And I left home very early and moved all over the United States and clinicking and riding and working student and all kinds of different things, and auditing and watching and listening. And so I had a lot of exposure to horses. And so as I wanted to progress and move forward in my education, I decided to head to Europe, because at that time the best competitions and trainers were over there compared to what was offered in the US. And so I headed over there, and I always say I got an education, but not what I went for. And as I worked under several Olympic trainers, I started realizing and connecting that there was pieces missing, that the way that things were addressed with the horses, as far as like, this is what you have to do in order to be successful, in order to make the magazine covers, in order to qualify for whatever competitions. I started noticing that there was a connection between the level of stress and fear that many of the horses were experiencing and their physical breakdowns. And as I started questioning, I'm going to say, the system of how we've always done it, it was a challenge, because here I was working towards something I had believed in and dedicated my life to, and started questioning the foundation in which it was built, because so many horses were breaking down. And the problem was, it didn't matter how many horses broke down, because there was always more horses. And when I say breakdown, I mean injuries. Often most of them were long-term injuries, and so basically took them out of the competition world. And then what happened to these horses, So as I started questioning all of these things, it really forced me to step back and reevaluate what was my priorities, what was my values, why was I doing this? And really, what was this competition fixation, we'll say, as like the main goal of what we were doing with the horses, really going to be fulfilling? And so as my journey evolved, and eventually I left Europe and sought out, a whole different world of horse people who I didn't even know existed, who I had to work pretty darn hard to get involved with, as far as seeing horses from a perspective of when you interacted and your life relied on your horse, because you were riding remote distances and you were moving livestock, and things started to matter that I hadn't ever really even known existed. Never mind, I couldn't really understand things like, why does it matter if your horse stands still? Why does it matter if your horse ground ties? Why does it matter if your horse doesn't kind of move off if you catch it? These little seemingly insignificant things that didn't even exist in this world I had been in for so long. And starting to hear how people would talk about horses in a totally different perspective, and it really made me think and evaluate. So basically, over the years, my journey has evolved, and so I've worked, like I said, with 3 days and 3-day eventers, and dressage and show jumpers and racetrack prep and endurance riders, and eventually I wound up in Texas and working with cutters and reined cow horse and ranch management and all kinds of different things, super remote facilities, all kinds of different things going on. And so my education has been really varied. My students are incredibly varied. They're worldwide. Everybody has different disciplines, and some are competitive, some are not competitive. But the common thing is the horse. And, my goal in helping people is to basically help translate everything that I didn't even know I didn't know. And, it's one of those things. I just talked about it in my Dear Sam series that I do on YouTube. I did it yesterday, where, you don't know what you don't know. And so the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know, as you raise your standard for quality and how the interaction is with the horse. So my goal in everything, if you look at my past posts and how I share things, or my blogs or my YouTube videos or everything else that I never thought I'd be doing online, it's really to try and come from a place of empathy. And when I talk about empathy with horses, it's not out of the poor horse or how we feel bad for the horse. It's really coming from a place of trying to say, if this is truly an equine partnership, which doesn't mean that the horse is there to serve us, which is how most people address the equine partnership, we'll say. But if we're coming from a place of, how do I work with my horse from where he is today in this moment, that changes everything. That changes everything in what I call the conversation. When I started with horses, it basically was a dictatorship. I mean, we pulled horses out and we're jumping over pickup trucks, and we don't have steering and we don't have brakes, and we never considered whether the horse's mind or emotions were, or there were so many things that, it was just like, yeah, whatever, put it to the side, because here's what the goal is. And at all costs, we were going to work towards that goal. And unfortunately, it was the horses who often paid the price for our lack of experience, our lack of empathy, our lack of understanding, and really our lack of believing the horse. So, in everything that I post, in all of my pictures and sharing from the horses that are in training, again, a lot of the troubled horses that wind up here, I am the last stop. And people don't ask for help until they've tried all of the mainstream things, all of the quick fixes, all of the tack and equipment, all of the drugs, all of these other things that would be really, really sort of, we'll say, relatively easy, if not financially expensive, until they finally go, okay, we have to peel back all the layers and we really have to rebuild from the foundation up. And unfortunately, it takes pretty dramatic bad scenarios before people are ready to start there, before the human becomes available to start there. So, my job is to really try and help people understand where these horses are coming from, try and translate in a realistic and honest manner that all of the common, I'm going to say, rhetoric that happens with horses, where people are assigning human emotions to explain the horse behavior, is irrelevant and inappropriate and inaccurate, and how much of that creates a human response that's not even appropriate because of the story that the human has going on in their head. So a lot of, when you hear about my alternative horsemanship, quotes, sayings, statements, things that I share in my perspective, all the boring videos of me riding where it looks like nothing exciting is happening, that comes from a place of, what if we restarted in building these foundation with these horses to where they were mentally, what I call, available, where that horse was interested in participating, where that horse was curious about the human, where the horse was willing to keep trying, even if what he initially offered wasn't quite what we were going for? And how do we as humans communicate in a way that is supportive and specific without being critical? Because we're really good at the critique. We critique ourselves, we critique the horse, and then all of a sudden you see the emotions come up in you, and then all of a sudden the way that we communicate starts to become aggressive and demanding, and then it goes back to that whole dictatorship relationship with the horse. So that's just kind of a background of like, where did all this alternative horsemanship come up with, and where did it come from? And every day, as I always say, every horse teaches me something new, and every time I teach a human student, it helps me improve what I do with my horsemanship. So all of this is not about me. This is about helping the human, helping the horse, and finding that ideal soft place of communication where you both want to show up with interest and curiosity and softness.